Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the national championship game, Alabama, Ohio State. Pat Murphy on the line, joining us from Bucknuts, as he does on a regular basis. Please join his work and hit that bell for the notifications once you have subscribed here. All right. Mac Jones made the comment this week, and this says a lot considering they faced a Texas A&M defense that was a top 5 to 10 unit in the nation, and a Georgia defense that through much of the season most people considered to be arguably the best in the nation. Mac Jones made the comment that this is going to be the best defense that he's seen this year.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because, as you and I have detailed throughout the season, I'm not sure Ohio State's defense quite qualifies for that. The rush defense certainly does. I wrote about that this week, how good both teams have been really against the run. It's the pass defense that both teams have struggled with. And Alabama's been better, especially of late. Take out that SEC championship game, but they were going against a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback in Kyle Trask. I think the niceties leading into these games are good. You're not trying to say anything it's going to, be a bulletin board material type of thing. At least in this case, it's happened in other games. But I think that, Ohio State's defense is certainly good. There's a reason they're in the national championship. They did, as Nick Saban said it this week about the secondary, they played well enough against Clemson to get here. The front seven was great, getting to Trevor Lawrence, stopping ETN, and the secondary held as much as they needed to, and I think that's the key here. It's nice of Mac Jones to give a compliment like that, but I'm sure when he looks at the film and sees kind of the way that quarterbacks have been able to pull apart this Ohio State secondary at times, and they've certainly made plays. Shaun Wade's had a handful of interceptions. Sevyn Banks had one against Clemson. They forced turnovers. So, there are certain things that Ohio State does well, but, to say it's the best defense they've faced, I think is a little bit of fluff, so to speak, as you head into a big game and not wanting to disparage your opponent.
In the mold of a Justin Fields being tabbed as the guy, he's the great quarterback. He's number one in the country. You could say the same about Najee Harris. Number one rated running back coming out of high school, has fulfilled all the expectations, scored a zillion touchdowns this year, has had a great all-time career at Alabama. Trey Sermon, on the other hand, very good player, comes from Oklahoma, but always split time with somebody, and boom, Big Ten championship game, 331 on the board. And then I would make the argument that he may have ran even better against Clemson. He ran just like a man possessed. So now we've got a bit of a running back duel between an established star and Trey Sermon, who's just come on like gangbusters.
It's an opportunity, I think, for Trey Sermon. And obviously he's shown a lot these last couple games, but an opportunity for him to showcase himself further. This is a senior, a guy who transferred here for one last year. And technically, because of NCAA rules this season, anybody can come back. But I think Trey Sermon has an eye on the NFL after this game. And, he's looked good these last couple games. But if you can do this against Alabama, I think people really start to notice, especially, again, not going head to head, but if you outperform Najee Harris, who, I assume will be one of the top running backs taken in the NFL draft, I think that certainly helps. And obviously, your main goal in all this is to help your team. Ohio State's offense these last in the last game at least, has been much more balanced. And you can even go back to Michigan State when Trey Sermon first had his first 100-yard game, got his first touchdown. Really, that was the first okay, this kid's starting to find it moment. I think when this offense is balanced, when Justin Fields can worry about distributing the ball to various weapons, and you can keep defenses on their toes because you can also run the ball, something Ohio State wasn't doing well early in the year. That's when the Buckeyes are really hard to defend. Same with Alabama. So, I think it's going to be interesting because, you want to get out there and you want to get all these different guys involved. But I think, it comes down to basic football, right? Getting the ball to running back, moving down the field. And then that usually opens up the passing game. And I think you've seen that with both of these teams and how they've executed this year.
We like to talk about the throwers and catchers and the speed guys, but that Alabama offensive line, defensive line play against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is really good on both sides of the ball in the trenches, and Alabama won the game because they have more skill and more speed, but they at least made it probably more than a stalemate against Notre Dame. Ohio State finished off pretty much what they established last year against Clemson. They won the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, certainly the offensive line against Clemson's D line last year. But then where that advantage was pretty obvious last year, it was a domination on both sides of the line, and especially the offensive line against Clemson. So we are talking about, again, the best of the best in the trenches, where it will just be a battle.
Well, and I think when you get to this point, you're usually talking about that in the national championship game. I mean, it's hard to get to that final game of the season in any football, really, if you don't have those players in the trenches. And Ohio State's defensive line really impressed me in that Clemson game. You know, I knew that these guys were talented. They'd obviously done very well against the run this year. They've pressured quarterbacks successfully. They just weren't always getting there, the defensive ends. They got to Trevor Lawrence. They made him uncomfortable. You know, they knocked the ball out of his hand 4 times. It was a really impressive performance, and one that will need to carry over to Monday night. You know, Alabama's offensive line just won the Joe Moore Award. They're, you know, considered the best offensive line in the country. So, you know, certainly a big challenge for Ohio State. And on the flip side, I think this Alabama defensive line, and watching them more closely the last several days, is good. Not quite the level that we've seen from Alabama defensive lines before. Still very good. Obviously, there's a reason they're here. But, with the way Ohio State's offensive line is played of late, especially if, you get a guy like Harry Miller back who missed the Clemson game, even though Matt Jones stepped in and played very well, you get that kind of cohesion along the front 5 there. That's where you may be able to have some advantages, open some holes for Trey Sermon, keep Justin Fields protected. But I think both sides are going to be very close. I think it's going to be, which team can win more often than lose, as opposed to completely dominating the game. I just don't see it happening that way in this one.